I'm one of the founders of KingstonCitizens.org, which started back in 2007. At that time, we did quite a bit of work, educational and advocacy work for our ward, which was Ward 9. That became a platform for many things. And I took a little hiatus to work in a different capacity in Kingston for the last few years. And now I'm back, and it's a real privilege here for me to get to know how city government works from the inside out. And for many years, there have been conversations in Kingston amongst residents about city manager forms of government. Not having much experience in understanding how that all worked, it was just a discussion for a bit. Recently, we're taking it back up, and I'm here tonight to start a series of city government, how it works, and what options exist for residents to consider and to discuss with their elected officials. So tonight, what we're going to do is listen to our guest panelists, who I will allow Jennifer Schwartz-Berkey, who's moderating tonight, to introduce to you. But the intention really is to explore two forms of government. There are 5, as far as I know, in the United States today. We're going to be discussing city manager forms of government and city administrator forms of government, and get to know and not only the forms of government, but our neighbors too. So I'd like to ask that everyone is respectful in sticking on topic. We're going to be taking questions, hopefully sooner in the second hour. So you're welcome to come up to the microphone and to speak to the panelists, ask questions. I'd like to keep it at around 3 minutes per question, so 1 minute for your question, 2 minutes response, so we can get them in. If there's more time, we can continue on. We're streaming this evening, thanks to Kingston News and Clark Richters. We're accepting comments on Twitter. If anyone out there is interested, you can log on at KingsCitizens, and or you can just go to KingstonCitizens.org, and you can link to our Twitter account there. The exits, here and here, as you know, as you came in. And so to begin, I'd like to introduce our moderator tonight, Jennifer Schwartz-Berkey, a 10-year resident here in the Hudson Valley, and someone I've worked with for many years. In fact, the one who got me involved in city government long ago. She's worked with numerous communities and organizations to plan and implement projects in historic sites and neighborhoods. Prior to this, she was a cultural heritage specialist and planner at the World Bank, and a design and construction project manager for many historic and cultural institutions in her native New York City. She has master's degrees from Columbia University in urban planning and real estate development, a BA in art history from SUNY Stony Brook, and a studied conservation at UNESCO's ICCROM program in Rome, Italy. And I've gotten to know her through her work with the county. So I'll introduce Jennifer Schwartz-Berkey, who will take it from here. Thank you.
Well, Rebecca might have talked to me about her interest in city government, but she didn't need much of a push to be off and running. So she's done tremendous work in the city in the last decade. She also asked me to moderate. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, because when I first came to Ulster County, I worked on the county charter with Dr. Gerald Benjamin at the time before we had a county charter, and we reviewed very similar issues that we're going to be reviewing tonight. So without further ado, let me introduce Meredith Robeson and Chuck Strome. And I'm sorry, but I have to read it because their introductions are so very illustrious. Meredith Robeson is the city administrator for the city of Beacon, and she has served in a variety of governmental positions for over 26 years. She has served in all levels of government except county government, and her career has spanned 3 states. She's currently the city administrator for the city of Beacon. She's very active in professional associations throughout her career, including serving on the New York State Conference of Mayors and Municipal Officials Executive Committee, and in her current roles as president of the New York City County Management Association and Northeast Vice President for the International City County Management Association. And if you look at the KingstonCitizens.org, you're going to see a very interesting publication called Life Well Run, which Meredith might tell you more about. Meredith and Chuck might tell you more about in the course of our questions. Ms. Robeson is an ICMA, that's International City and County Management Association. She's an ICMA credentialed manager and has a Bachelor of Science from Southern Illinois University and a Master of Public Administration from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She has participated in numerous professional development programs, including the following leadership training opportunities: Wallkill Valley Community Leadership Alliance, Leadership Greater Waterbury, and Pace University Land Use Leadership Alliance Training Program. Chuck Strome is the city manager of New Rochelle, and on November 12, 2002, the City Council of New Rochelle unanimously appointed Chuck as city manager. Mr. Strome served as acting city manager since March 2002 and as deputy city manager since 1995. Prior to that, he served as director of emergency services from 1989 through 1992 and then became assistant city manager and city coordinator. Mr. Strome has a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Communications from Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, and a Master's of Public Administration in Government from Pace University. Before joining government, Mr. Strome held positions at Hudson Westchester Radio, where he was news director, vice president, and program director. He is a member of ICMA as well, and a former president of the New York State City County Managers Association. He is also the past president, vice president, and secretary of the Municipal Administrators Association of Metropolitan New York. So welcome to both of you. It's really wonderful to have you, especially because it's clear that your involvement in government is a part of your sense of civic duty, and I'm honored by that. We're honored by that. So let's start with a very basic question and have both of you respond to them. And you can decide as you wish who goes first. To start, how many forms of government are there? Actually, I think Rebecca mentioned there are 5.
I think that's right.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think you may actually have some information, but there are basically 5. There are variations on those themes, depending on the state and the community in which you live. But it's a council manager form, mayor-council form, commission form, representative town meeting form, and a town meeting form. And actually, I've served in everything but the representative town meeting form in my career, so it's an interesting dynamic sometimes in those different forms of government.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I would add that in New York, overwhelmingly it's either the council manager form, which could be a manager or an administrator, not really a whole lot of difference there, or a council mayor form, or what I like to call strong mayor form of government. Those are the 2 predominant forms of government in New York State. Where I'm from in Westchester County, New Rochelle is the 2nd largest community in Westchester County. We are also the largest community in New York State with the council manager form of government. New Rochelle has a population of about 78,000 people. Outside of New York City, we're the 6th largest city in the state. And we've had the council manager since 1932. So, whereas Meredith mentioned those other 3 kinds of government, I can confess I have no knowledge or experience of any of them. But in New York, the great majority of communities either have some form of council manager form of government or what they call a strong mayor or council mayor form of government.
So Meredith, could you say, in your experience, what some of the differences were for you in terms of balance of powers or just in terms of your responsibilities?
I would say that largely my responsibilities were the same in terms of running the day-to-day affairs of the communities. What was different was the mechanism and the organization of the elected officials, and whether or not there was currently now a mayor with a city council, and in other forms there was basically, it was an offshoot of the commission form where there was a township committee. So all of them had equal power in terms of the legislative end of things, and then I still took care of the day-to-day as the town manager in that community. So it really was more how the political folks were organized and whether or not they were equal partners in the government. And I still pretty much was the individual, or the folks that I worked for when I was an assistant, were the individuals responsible still for running the day-to-day affairs of the municipality.
I could add, maybe it's a good time to just kind of focus on the differences between council mayor and council manager. Essentially, the council manager form of government, the city council is the policy-making body of the municipality. The mayor, if there is one, in some communities they select a mayor, they alternate being mayor. But in most of them, the mayor is elected. The mayor is actually a voting member of the city council. More akin, if you're familiar with New York City, the mayor's role in a council manager form of government is more similar to the president of the city council rather than the chief executive officer, chief administrative officer. What that ends up doing is, in my opinion, putting a significant amount of power in the hands of the entire city council. In the strong mayor form of government, there is significant power in the office of the mayor. The mayor is the chief executive officer, and the city council becomes simply a legislative body, but there's all sorts of vetoes and overrides and things of that nature. In New Rochelle, from my experience, and I've had a lot of experience, I've been there for 25 years, the purpose, at least in New Rochelle, of having a council manager form of government is to keep the politics out of the day-to-day operation of the government. So in our community, the mayor and council, as I like to refer to them because they are all in the same body, they only make two appointments. They appoint the city manager, and that's based on qualifications that are outlined in the city charter, and they appoint the city clerk, which I guess you could say is a political appointment. All of the department heads, commissioners, and everybody else that works for the city is responsible to the city manager, not the city council or the mayor. The purpose of that is to have professionals in those positions that don't change every time the mayor comes in. They don't have to bring in a whole new team of professionals. The city manager is the chief administrative officer, chief executive officer, sits at the city council table, does not have a vote, and makes policy recommendations. The mayor has one vote on the council, the same as anybody else. And I would point out that one of the key things about the council manager form of government is that the manager works equally for all members of the council. Republican, Democrat, some communities are nonpartisan, so the manager is responsible to everybody, whether you're in the council majority or the council minority. There's an attempt to apply the operation of government evenly across the city.
Now, I know this one you can ace, and it's not on our list, but I think people may be wondering, where does this profession come from? I think we should establish that, because maybe people are wondering, how do you become a city manager or city administrator? Where do you typically, how did this profession arise?
Well, I think that you would find, just as Chuck and I are not terribly lookalikes and come from exactly the same backgrounds, I think that if you took a look at all of the managers and administrators across the country, you would find similar differences, if that's the correct type of analogy to use. But we come from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of educational backgrounds and experiential backgrounds, although I will say that I think for the most part nowadays, folks in our positions have masters, whether they have an MBA or an MPA, you know, they have now made this their life's work, so to speak. And I, for instance, did my undergrad degree in recreation, and I know other managers who have a similar background, but then came to local government and to the management profession. So some folks have come from the business world and have entered and have gone through school and gotten their master's and gotten the experience that way as assistants perhaps in other communities or as department heads in other communities. So I think we really do, for the most part, run the gamut of backgrounds. But once we've come to these types of positions as an assistant or as the manager or administrator, then I think largely, although not completely, you would find that most of us have MBAs or MBAs and become very involved in our professions, just as Chuck and I have.
I think most municipalities that have the council manager form of government tend to require a master's degree in, preferably public administration, but a master's degree in something. And most of the colleagues that I know that I work with have the master's in public administration. So that's really the base qualification for the most part.
Can you tell us how your roles are different and similar as city manager and city administrator?
Jenny, can you get up on the mic, please?
Okay, so can you tell us how your roles are similar and different as city administrator and city manager?
Maybe I'll start. They're actually quite similar. In New Rochelle, we have the classic council manager form of government. There is the manager acts as the chief administrative, chief executive officer. And I think the only difference between what I do and what Meredith does is in some appointive power. I appoint everybody, as I mentioned. There is no confirmation by the city council. It's the chief executive's role to appoint professionals to the position. The council has no authority to hire and fire anybody other than the manager. So that's really the strong council manager form of government. I think in Meredith's case, I'll let her speak, there may be some little differences in appointment, but essentially in New Rochelle, you know, the role of the city manager is to be the chief administrative officer of the city and to supervise and coordinate the day-to-day operations to make sure they're done in a professional manner. I don't think that's much different from what an administrator does. I think the only difference is really somewhat technical in how charters are written and in appointive powers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Largely, the work is the same. It's making sure that all of the operations in the community are handled professionally and efficiently and effectively. So whether it's a manager or administrator, it's largely the same. In the forms of government where I've worked as a manager as opposed to an administrator, one was in the township committee form, which was like the commission form. The entire group of committee persons had to select the manager, and no one voice, although there was a chairman of the committee, no one individual had greater authority in terms of the governing body than the others. And that was similar in the other forms for the most part. In Beacon, we do have a mayor who is the CEO, and the council is the legislative end, but the mayor is still a voice of the elected officials. So he does not have a greater vote than the rest of the city council, but he does make the appointments subject to council consent. So whether it's the city administrator or other employees, it's the mayor's appointment with the council consent. However, in reality, how it works is that I'm still responsible for getting all of the pre-hiring, all the interviews, the selection done, and then I make the recommendation to the mayor, who then goes forward to the council if he sees fit. Now, I've been fortunate in the time that I've been in the city of Beacon where both mayors that I've worked for have very much relied on me and on the rest of staff to make those calls, because they're not working with the folks on a day-to-day basis. We are. And so they have, In essence, it turns out to be the same, but technically, it is not. It is the mayor's responsibility with council consent. So for the most part, as you heard from Chuck, it is really an appointment power type of difference in authority and responsibility than it is in terms of just running the day-to-day affairs of government.
So why would a city that doesn't have a manager or administrator, why would they potentially choose to do that?
Well, I'll preface this by saying we're going to be somewhat biased because we are what we are. I think, in my experience, that the cities with council manager forms of government have more professionally run operations than others. That's not true in all cases, and you can have a bad city manager just as easily as you can have a bad mayor. But the likelihood is that if there are some strict requirements in place, and you have a professional manager who is running things and professionals at the department head level, you get some sense of stability and consistency in the government. And the city council, as legislators, sets policy direction for the city. They determine what direction the city should go in. To give you an example, I don't think you could find in a city that has a strong mayor form of government the type of situation that we have in New Rochelle. I've got a fire commissioner who's been with us, not as the fire commissioner, but he's been with the fire department for 35 years. My finance commissioner's been with us for 23 years. Public Works is relatively new, and development is relatively new, but there's a consistency that it doesn't change every time the mayor changes. You get new people in. There's no real need for people to be appointed to positions that don't have the qualifications. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but just because somebody worked on somebody's campaign and might get a job because that person owes somebody something, that doesn't happen in council managed forms of government. And I can honestly tell you, in the 25 years that I've been in New Rochelle, I have never once been told by an elected official, hire or fire somebody. So it only works when the two branches of the government understand and respect their roles. The elected officials have to buy into the system. So unless they take it seriously and do it that way, the council manager is not going to be any more effective than the strong mayor. And if you want an example of that, you can look at the city of Yonkers in Westchester County, which for many years had a council manager form of government, and they just appointed politicians to be the city manager, and every year they were getting a new city manager. So if the elected officials buy into it, and there's a strong community support for professional government, that I think is the main reason to do it. There's a better chance for a professional operation, albeit there's always a political end of things, and the elected officials are the ones responsible to the voters and those that should be setting the policy. My role is to recommend policy, develop the budget, and submit it to the council for their approval, but in the end, the elected officials are the ones that have the final say in which direction the city is going, but they have accepted the fact that professionals should be running the day-to-day operations and making sure that things are done properly. And I'll just conclude by saying, I think local government is relatively simple, at least from my perspective. Our main job is to pick up the garbage, put police on the street, put out the fires if there are any fires, and have some recreation for our communities, and make sure our finances are in order. And in each one of those cases, I think it's very important to have a professional person running the day-to-day operation of those departments, not a politically appointed person, which is often the case when you have the other form of government.
Thank you, Chuck. We heard you wanted to add something to that point.
Yeah, let me just add that I think that one of the benefits, and as Chuck said, we are a bit biased, so I'll apologize perhaps up front for that, but I think one of the benefits of having a professional in these positions is that we live and breathe this stuff every day. We are responsible for making sure that we're up on the rules and regulations and laws that impact the various operations that we run. So we're in it. We're in it 24/7 when we're doing this work. So I don't think that you could expect an individual who comes from a very